Hey, it's Missy.
It's April.
And this is SheelaNaGig. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being here. We are delighted because we have a special guest today. But before I say that, I'm just going to say that each week we explore our own SheelaNaGig. To us, that's a woman whose strength and perseverance empowers us, strengthens us, inspires us. And it could be somebody you heard of or didn't hear of, but should, right? So, just want to give these ladies some more light. That's our whole premise here, giving these ladies the light that they deserve. But we're really excited because we are finishing up, and this is part two of our episode
with Fawn Brokaw Doyle.
Mm-hmm.
And Fawn was telling us about her 8th great-grandmother, Sarah Rapalje. And just as a reminder, by day, Fawn is a design professional, wife, and a mother. And by night, she's a historian, a genealogist, and an author. Her debut historical fiction novel, Salt People of the Cloud Houses, is based on her 8th great-grandmother, Sarah Rapalje. And Sarah was the very first child of European heritage. She was born in New York in 1625. The novel was published on June 9th, 2025, on the 400th anniversary of Sarah's birth. This story is a coming of age for a frontier woman, but also for the city that would become my own hometown, New York.
No, say it like New York.
New York. Like New York. Because I was born in Brooklyn and it was the city.
That's how she really talks, but she has to, because every now and then when she gets mad or like she's tired, she slips into that. So that's really April's voice. But anyway, well, we're delighted to have you back.
Thank you.
And I'm just super, I think it's fascinating that you have been able to actually research and find the story of your 8th great-grandmother. I mean, most of us are lucky to go back to, maybe great. So I think it's fascinating. And if you listen to the first episode, you can hear a little bit more about how that happened and how she kind of came upon this quest. But I'm excited because I was saying earlier that, when I was a kid, my dad was a storyteller. He was a writer. He actually got to work with Rod Serling. He took classes from him at Antioch College in his 30s.
I never knew that.
Yeah. Really? Yeah. They were buddies. They'd go out for a beer after class because he was like the oldest guy in the class.
Cool.
Yeah. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But anyway, he would always tell me these stories. I was the youngest, and it would be like these 4-part stories. It was always like around a holiday. It'd be like the Halloween story about One Eye, whatever. And then he would tell me part of the story, and then he would leave because he was a traveling salesman for 3 or 4 days. And then he would come back and tell the next part. And then he would leave for 3 or 4 days, come back. And so I was always like, I couldn't wait for my dad to come back and tell me the next part of the story. Like, it was so exciting to me. So I kind of feel that about today, about Fawn's story.
I'm sorry to keep you in suspense, but I'm happy to be back, and I'm happy to talk with you both again.
Yes, we're so happy you're back. And before we jump in, because again, I am very excited to jump in, we had a little discussion about the name of your book. By the way, tell them a little bit about your book. I know that you put it out here in June, but tell them a little bit more about your book.
So Salt People of the Cloud Houses is available basically wherever books are sold. You can get signed copies on my website, and I have some little immersive reading book boxes on there too. So the title came from a point where I was writing the story and trying to conceptualize the cultural identity of New York at that time, because Sarah's French. She's in a Dutch colony. Her first husband's Norwegian. There's at least 18 different languages being spoken in the city at that time. And I was just trying to figure out collectively how to represent that. So Salt People of the Cloud Houses comes from the Algonquian tribes, what they called the Europeans and their ships. So salt people, because Europeans are pale and came from across the ocean, and cloud houses because they thought the ships looked like longhouses and the sails looked like clouds. And I just thought it was a kind of poetic image and kind of encapsulated the cultures and nodded to the perception that the indigenous people had.
That's so cool.
That is.
And look at us. We're all salt people.
Yeah.
Right? We're all have European heritage here. I guess we're all
Yeah.
salt people, right?
Yeah.
I love that name. Very poetic
you.
indeed. It's really, really cool. I love that story. That's really cool. And we are ready to jump in. So I know where do we leave off on, like, her next marriage, right? We're jumping in.
Yeah, she has 2 marriages, and it's kind of like she lives 2 lives, beginning again with a new husband, and they're living in Long Island at that time, in the area that is the Brooklyn Navy Yard. So Brooklyn, I wanted to explain too that Brooklyn was a town that is basically where the Brooklyn Bridge is now. So like the Dutch called that area, the whole area, Long Island, like the area that you would call like the
I was
Brooklyn
wondering
borough.
about that.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so there were several small Dutch towns, but Sarah and her parents lived on just homesteads, like kind of out in farmland, in kind of Williamsburg area. So
Now
yeah,
Brooklyn.
so her second husband is named Tunis Bogart. He was from a small farming village in the Netherlands called Heekoop, and in the province of Utrecht. He had been a sailor for the Dutch West India Company. And he had cousins that had settled up north, but he and his younger brother-in-law, Aert Middahl, decided to stay in the New York, Long Island area. They were granted 100 acres in what's now Bed-Stuy, and they started a sawmill, and he had farming experience, so they continue farming, and he became one of the most prosperous farmers in Long Island. And I'm sure Sarah was part of that.
Sure.
Raising the children, but also she would have been, working on the farm and taking care of the
Remind
animals.
us how many children she had.
Over a span of 28 years, she has 16 total, and 13 of which lived to adulthood, which is pretty incredible for that time.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so
That
she
is
has
mind-blowing.
almost
Sheela and herself. Like in itself, right? Like that's crazy.
Buys her.
Yeah. It is. It's wild. That was one of the hardest things to like imagine, from that point of view, because I have one child and I'm one and done.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry.
Yeah. We both have 2.
We have
and
2.
Yeah,
Yeah. All set. Done.
Yeah. No way.
Yeah.
Wow, that is amazing. And it sounds like she chose well. Sounds like he was a good guy, just like her last husband, correct?
Yeah. She basically has equal amount of children basically with each husband. So it really is like two different lives that this woman lived, Oh, I wanted to bring up, in Dutch law, in marriage contracts, women could choose manus or usus, and those were 2 different choices. Manus meant that you were basically under the protection of your husband. He was your representative in court. All property would be under his name, and usus meant that the woman could retain her own property. It's basically like a prenup.
Oh.
So you could say, like, you have to adopt previous children. I retain my own property. I can do business in my own name. I can own my own property. And that the usus,
progressive.
yeah, right. Usus marriage was very common in this area out of necessity. A lot of the time, husbands would be away on ships. They would be, up north fur trading and trapping. So the usus marriage was very common, that women had to act on behalf of their, mutual property. So there isn't paperwork or, there's not a record available what marriage type Sarah would have had with her second husband. But, it was so common for the usus marriage. And she actually shows up later in records buying property in her own name, and this second husband isn't mentioned at all. So I think I know which one.
So progressive.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that changed later. Women couldn't own property.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
We just did an episode about that. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. I stick a pin in that of it comes up later when that change happens in this colony.
April loves to put a pin in things, by the way.
Yeah, that was for April.
Thank you.
So to place us in time, we're in the early 1600s now. Unfortunately, war broke out again with natives up north, this time in Esopus, which is now Kingston. And it didn't really affect, the settlers in Long Island until the director, who was Peter Stuyvesant at this point, he commanded that all Outlander settlements be relocated to palisaded villages. It was proposed that one of these villages be planted on a part of Sarah's land. So it's just kind of interesting that, like, they were definitely advocating to be, like, to keep themselves together and, like, trying to say, like, this growing Rapalje family is becoming its own village practically. And there's other Walloons that had settled in the area. But it seems like it was decided that they locate a village on her parents' land where there was just better access to spring water. So, once again, she's packing up and starting over and having to rebuild again and again.
Very resilient. And I think you really had to be very resilient during those times. I mean,
Yeah.
how could you
And
not
with
have
all those children, like, I can't imagine just, starting over again and looking after your fields and your children. And it's a lot.
Right. Yeah. Just thinking that, a little shout out to my oldest sister. I remember she has twins, identical twins. And when I had my son, I said to her, what's your best piece of advice? And she said, you have to be completely flexible. If you can't be flexible, it's not going to work for you. Mm-hmm. And I thought there were so many times I'd just be like, oh, just be flexible. Yeah. And it was true. Yeah. Right. So it sounds like Sarah was very flexible. She knew how to do that.
By necessity.
Yes. By necessity. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that things were getting a little better, like they were becoming more prosperous, so they could probably afford more, maybe they had a better house at that point too. I hope things were progressing for her and that it wasn't just a struggle. But sadly, in February of 1663, her father died. He died during an election of church elders in Flatbush, where the Dutch Reformed Church was. So I just imagine that was a huge blow, because he was such like a pillar of the community.
I'm sure such a patriarch to the community, it seems, since they were, so many of them were part of that family. And oh my gosh, it's terrible. How sad.
Yeah, and her father had been there since, the very beginning. So like people relied on him a lot. And
you know how old he was?
I can't remember off the top of my head. I think he was probably in his 60s.
Okay.
So like a decently long life for
which
back
is
then.
pretty good age for that time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the following month, there's a land patent made in Sarah's name. And this is the one that I was talking about. It's in her name alone. No mention of the second husband. It's for a plot of land on Manhattan. So I found that really interesting, that she's obviously very independent, going to Manhattan probably to sell their produce and whatnot, and maybe like other things like her lace making, who knows. I don't know. It intrigued me that she had like this investment property, because I don't think she was living there. Maybe she rented it out, or it was kind of unclear.
Savvy businesswoman.
Yeah. She had interesting neighbors, and I got, this was one more rabbit hole that I went down to just understand more fully like the people that she would have known and interacted with. So to the east, her neighbor was Susanna Negrin. And Negrin was a Spanish surname given to Black people. So immediately I was intrigued that there's an African woman owning land. So that, made me dive into like what was the enslaved people and freed Black people, what was their life like in this time?
Yeah, that sounds, tell me more.
Yeah.
I want to hear about this rabbit hole.
So slavery was a murky issue in the Dutch colony, especially in the early days. It wasn't codified into law, so there wasn't like clear parameters. The first enslaved people arrived in 1628. They were considered a Portuguese prize, or like pirated goods, because they were seized off of a Spanish ship by the Dutch West India Company. So slavery was not legal in the Netherlands at that point, but goods stolen from a Spanish or Portuguese ship were fair game for the Dutch West India Company. So they exploited that. And before the 1650s, enslaved Africans from Angola and the Congo were almost exclusively owned just by the company. So not like by private individuals, but they could be like rented out to farmers to help, work on these farms and build municipal projects. They could marry, and when they weren't working for the company, they could hire themselves out for wages. They couldn't own real property, but movable property was allowed, and they were permitted to raise their own crops.
What do you mean by movable property?
It would be like clothing or goods.
Oh, I see.
So
Like goods.
household items.
Understood.
Stuff like that.
Okay, good.
But not land.
Not land or any type of other property per se.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, if they were enslaved. They could file suits in court, and their testimony could convict white people. And this included Phoebe's father, who was, this cantankerous Englishman who always was arguing with his neighbors. And the neighbors were mostly in this enslaved African community. He drove some of their cows into a swamp. And
wow.
so the people took him to court for that. And, they filed.
Well, they
against.
should have.
Yeah.
So in many ways, enslaved people had more rights back then than they did later.
It's still pretty shitty.
But it's fascinating.
It is fascinating. It is. Yeah.
And they lived together. So, and in the early days, a lot of this is like constantly changing, and, progressing and devolving too. So in 1644, it was Director Kieft at that time. He granted manumission to 11 enslaved men and their wives. And these were likely those people who first arrived in 1628. So that, is good. Like if you work a certain amount of time, maybe these, it gives hope that they would be freed. But their children were not granted manumission. And SheelaNaGig's parents, Anthony, or sometimes he's called Gracia, d'Angola, and Maria, her mother, were among those freed. But unfortunately, that did not include Susanna at that point. And then I was searching more for, I was like looking, trying to find anything more about this woman. And I found, although later in the 17th century, a small number of Black people became church members, prior to 1664, there is only one, SheelaNaGig. So she became a full member of the church, which was a difficult thing. It required answering all 129 questions in the Heidelberg Catechism. That was the Dutch Reformed Church's teaching tool. So I thought that was pretty remarkable. And then, so she was 17 years old when she became a full member of the church. And likely around this time, she appealed to the director. So it was still Director Kieft at this point. And I believe she was granted manumission then. So good for her.
Great.
Like it's still not great, that there's slavery in the colony, but there are some people finding a way around it.
Mm-hmm.
And after the death of both of her parents, Susanna was noted as a free person. She was the sister and guardian of her brother Joachim, and she advocated for him in the courts and got him an apprenticeship with a wine merchant for 3 years, during which time her brother would receive food and clothing and be taught to read and write. So like that's
perks. Perks for sure.
She's definitely advocating for, herself and her family members.
And the fact that she can says something about that it was definitely, while I don't want to idolize it, it's still slavery and, a limited amount of rights. She had some rights and was able to exercise them.
Yeah, right. And her half-brother Lucas was a barber surgeon at the company's hospital. And there was some records that said she was a midwife. So, she had a way to make money and care for herself and her family. And I wanted to include her as a character in the story because I think Sarah would have known her being church members and, also it's her neighbor. So
She sounds
I
like a
just-
Sheela.
Yeah. She
Yeah.
Sounds like a Sheela in her own right,
Yeah.
for sure.
yeah,
Advocating the way she did. And I mean, yeah, absolutely.
yeah, yeah. And it's another one of those voices that we don't hear from, and we
Right.
should know more about.
Absolutely.
And
Thank
just
you for
that
bringing her up.
the ties of New York with slavery. You know, we think in the Civil War, like New York is in the North, like they weren't an enslaving state, but they unfortunately have a deep history, and it's, you know, uncomfortable and awful, but it's important to recognize. So then the ill-fated year of 1664 and the English conquest happens. So
Needed.
So at this point, Sarah and Tunis had been married for 10 years. They have four children together at this point, and 11 total, just to check it back in with them. But
Did he have kids from prior marriage
so
too,
in-
or no? Do you know
No.
if he had kids? No. Okay.
no,
Okay.
yeah. So in January of 1664, the director, Peter Stuyvesant, was actually warned that the English were coming, that they were going to invade by a woman named Quashawam, and she was a Sunk-Squaw sachem, or a female tribal leader of the Montaukett on eastern Long Island.
That's interesting
And-
in itself, a female tribal leader,
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
like Wilma
Another
Mankiller,
Right.
right? One of our
Yeah.
Sheilas. That's really
Yeah.
interesting.
She was seeking Dutch help because the English were encroaching on her tribal lands, but Stuyvesant dismissed her, you know, like no, you know, didn't give her any help, and dismissed her warning that the English were coming to take Dutch land. And then in March of 1664, an Englishman named John Scott rode through the Dutch towns on Long Island, declaring himself president of Long Island, and that New Netherland now belonged to England. So in Brooklyn, he rode through and he demanded that this little boy like doff his cap to the English flag. And the little boy probably didn't understand English, first of all, but he didn't take his hat off. So this guy, John Scott, slaps him, and eventually John Scott has a meeting with director Stuyvesant, and Stuyvesant conceded more like smaller Dutch settlements to the English, and the Dutch were driven away from those lands. So Stuyvesant is kind of, you know, making concessions and trying to keep the peace and keep most of New Netherland intact. And then interestingly, Quashawam and John Scott team up, and John Scott becomes her legal representative. And she was able to make the English officially recognize the boundaries of Montaukett land. And that kept her people's land preserved for the next 200 years. So
It's amazing.
yeah,
Wow. That's
And
amazing.
she was quite young at the time too. I think she died before she was 40. So yeah, really remarkable.
Another Sheila. Yeah.
Yeah. So in August of 1644, 4 English warships arrive in the harbor. Director Stuyvesant was dead set against surrender, but they didn't have the soldiers or gunpowder to win. And then plus there was a petition by 93 of the town's wealthiest prominent citizens that they advocated for surrender rather than have their property and businesses and families harmed in a battle that they couldn't win.
Yeah. They had no choice, it sounds like.
Yeah. But they did negotiate for generous terms of surrender. And the greatest change being that New Amsterdam was now called New York. So
It is. Yuck.
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. They even stipulated that the taverns wouldn't close like between the takeover.
Let's
So
get
it's really-
clear on our priorities.
It's
Yeah.
true. After getting taken over like that, you'd really want to be able to drink whatever you wanted. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But all the other like Dutch inheritance laws and all the court and legal rights, all of that remained, at least initially. We'll get to that later. And then, yeah, so it was interesting to me that it was 4 years after the English takeover that patent that Sarah had been granted on Manhattan, it was confirmed in her name by the English. So they're still allowing women to own land, and just confirming however, her property with Tunis on Long Island is confirmed in his name, which I found interesting. Just that, like, it should have been inherited by her from her first husband. So,
Yeah.
Interesting.
yeah. So it would be 30 years after English takeover when the Dutch rights changed abruptly. The Duke laws went into effect, and women largely drop out of the records beyond birth, marriage, death, theft, or prostitution. That's like what it's reduced to.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Hell.
So the law of primogeniture meant that inheritance went entirely to the eldest son. And coverture meant that women were under the protection and authority of their father or their husband. They couldn't run businesses or own property as freely as under the Dutch rule.
Yeah.
So annoying.
I know. We were just literally
we were just
reporting on that.
Yeah. Oh my
really?
gosh.
Yeah. So
Backwards. Happens all the time.
Yeah.
Look at us right now.
I know, and then it was like 200 years until those laws of coverture were eventually slowly taken back. But in Sarah's lifetime, luckily, she didn't see those changes happen. She died in 1685 at the age of 60. And like I said, she had 16 children over 28 years, and including 2 sets of twins. One historian wrote that Sarah was a woman of great talent and physical vigor. During her long life, she was the acknowledged social head of Brooklyn. So part of her legacy, of the Rapalje legacy, is that over 1 million Americans are descended from the Rapaljes, and her descendants include the actor Humphrey Bogart, news anchor Tom Brokaw, governor of Vermont.
Talking about Tom Brokaw. I was going to ask about that. That's funny. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Who did you say after that?
Governor of Vermont, Howard Dean, musician Mark O'Connor, and Royal Baking Powder founder Joseph Hoagland.
Wow.
And her mother, Catalina, had 11 children, 10 of whom lived to adulthood. And her descendants include Marvel cartoonist Elle Fagley, George Rapalje, who played a key part in the Scopes monkey trial about teaching evolution, artist Mary Lucier, news anchors Claire Balding and Anderson Cooper, railroad tycoon Cornelius Vanderbilt, fashion designer Gloria Vanderbilt, and actors Michael Douglas, Ryan Reynolds, and Timothy Oliphant.
Wow. That's so interesting.
It is. It's
That's
amazing.
super interesting.
So I have a question about the name Rapalje. Was that her maiden name? Was that Sarah's maiden?
Yeah.
Yes. So that really is that family name.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
It's amazing that you were able to extract all of that history.
I know. And I have to go back to the 16 children for a second, 13 of whom lived to adulthood. Do you know when she had her first child?
She was like 15. It was pretty immediately after she was married at 14. So
Right.
Yeah.
So that gives you, let's 28 years.
Yeah.
Never
So
did
it was
math.
like
Let's see.
half her lifetime was spent birthing children.
35. Yeah. She was in her late 30s when she had her last child, probably, right? So
I think it was early 40s. She was in her early 40s.
Yeah, like I said, I'm not really good at math, but that's
interestingly, she had all daughters with Tunis until the last child was a boy. And I'm sure at that point she was like, okay, I'm done.
That's hilarious.
I've delivered your obligatory son. We're finished.
Yeah.
Hilarious. They say in terms of like science, statistically speaking, science, the older you are, the more likely you are to have a boy than you are to have a girl.
Yeah. That's interesting.
That's interesting.
So that kind of makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of daughters in the family, and those daughters, went on to create a lot more children, to have 1 million descendants today. But I think, Sarah personifies the strength and perseverance that, like I can't, it's hard to even imagine what life was like back then. And like, it's not a life I would want for myself, like having to toil from sun up to sundown, and, but it's definitely inspiring that she persisted.
And so inspiring.
The legacy of the Dutch in New York, and especially Long Island, is evident in place names like I said, Brooklyn, Bushwick, Flatbush, Harlem, Coney Island, Staten Island was named after an actual wall that the Dutch built across Manhattan.
And I have to add, I was born in Flatbush.
Oh, yeah.
You have to say it with your accent, though.
Yeah, like I was born in Flatbush.
Of course you were.
It was called Vlakbosch, but it's pretty close to Flatbush. in Dutch.
When you get to the Brooklyn version, it's Flatbush.
Yeah. Yeah.
So hilarious. Wow.
And Bergen Beach was named after descendants of Sarah and her first husband. And there's a Rapalje Street in Carroll Gardens neighborhood in Brooklyn.
Wow. Have you been there? Have you visited?
I haven't yet, actually.
You got to get your picture with the sign.
I know,
right?
Yeah, I definitely need to next trip.
I need to interrupt you, but I can just picture that. So yeah.
And there's a town in Montana called Rapalje that was named after a descendant who was he was a president of the railway company. And then plus the Dutch contributed a lot of foods that we now consider American, but originated from the Dutch, like coleslaw, donuts, waffles. And it's the reason why we call small baked goods cookies and not biscuits like the English, is because it was a Dutch word.
Oh, that's cool. Wait, donuts too? That's interesting. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I love learning about stuff like that.
Yeah.
I find that fascinating. Yes.
And the tradition of Santa Claus came from the Dutch as well. It was Sinterklaas.
Wow.
And I just wanted to say that this country is built on immigrants, and I don't think it's more noble or it doesn't hold more clout to have an ancestor among the first Americans or immigrants. I think that they came here to escape persecution and take part in economic opportunity, just like immigrants do today. And I hope that this novel might create more empathy for immigrants, because, the first generations that come always have a difficult life, and, they're all starting from scratch.
Yeah, exactly. And this country is built from immigrants. That's the bottom line. So it's true.
Very true.
On a side note, have you ever had banquet? It's a Dutch dessert.
I don't know. I don't think so.
It's like this flaky, it comes in a long log, and it's kind of flaky, and then it has marzipan inside of it.
Oh,
and
okay.
Delicious. But, because I grew up in Michigan, and we had Holland, Michigan, where a lot of people came and, who were Dutch and settled there. So, we'd always go there and buy banquet when we visited. It was like the traditional dessert, and it was so good. And I still, whenever I go back to Michigan, I'm like, yeah, stop in Holland and get some banquet. So seeing as you're Dutch, I just thought I'd ask, you got to get yourself some banquet. You can probably buy it on Amazon.
Yeah, I got to try it.
It's so delish.
My go-to Dutch treat is stroopwafels. Have you ever had stroopwafels?
Oh, are those like wafer cookies with like the caramel in the middle or whatever, or honey?
Yeah,
oh my gosh, those are so good.
Yeah, I like
those are Dutch too. Oh my gosh. I always have to put those in my husband's stocking. He loves those. It's like a big thing. I always want to get those on Amazon for Christmas. Yeah.
Yeah, I love those.
Do you make any traditional like Dutch dishes, like cooking? Have you explored any of that?
Yeah, I mean they make a lot of the recipes are stuff that we would eat normally. Like they ate a dish called sapan, but it's basically like corn grits, and it's just cornmeal and milk, and then you can add whatever is sweet or savory to that. There's a cookie they make during Christmas time called Krudnoten, but it's basically a ginger snap cookie. It has like a white pepper in it, so it's a little more, has more of a kick to it. But yeah, a lot of, and it's just funny because like a lot of these, Dutch traditions are so absorbed in the American culture that we just think they were always, we always called them.
Yeah,
cookies.
right.
Never occurred to
Yeah.
me to think about where did that originate from.
It's true.
Yeah,
It's true. There's a German cookie called Pfeffernussen. You ever heard of that? Pfeffernussen? Sometimes they call it pepper nuts, like the American pronunciation is pepper nut.
Yeah.
But my mother-in-law is German, and she grew up in a German farming family in the Central Valley, Mennonite family, and she makes this Pfeffernussen every Christmas. But like you said, it has white pepper in it. When you said that, I was like, oh, it sounds like Pfeffernussen. Yeah, so it's really, it sounds similar.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Yeah, it's not ginger though, but yeah, I like ginger. Sounds delicious. You should try that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The one last thing to close with. So Catalina, Sarah's mother, lived to be 84 years old.
What?
So
That's
she
probably unheard of at that time, right?
Yeah. And she actually, so she outlived Sarah. And really interestingly, there's a journal that Labradist missionary wrote. He kept this journal when he visited, and he was taken to Catalina as, she was often consulted in her golden years for being like a living record of the early days, because
a
lot of those records don't survive from the early days. But there's this entry that this man wrote about Catalina. She is worldly minded, living with her whole heart as well as body among her progeny, which now number 145 and will soon reach 150. Nevertheless, she lived alone by herself, a little apart from the others, having her garden and other such conveniences with which she helped herself. And I just thought that was so, like, what a lovely idea that, like,
Yeah, sweet,
very
touching, and touching. Although I feel bad that she lived by herself.
Sounded like she wanted to.
She doesn't love children. That's true. What she had 10. She had 10, right? So yeah, she was probably like, okay, I'm done with this crap. Like,
like
some peace.
I need to be a little apart, but still have visitors when she wants them.
That's amazing, though, and how sweet that you have that. Like, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. Yeah, it really surprised me that I could find out more about these women from 400 years ago than, like, even just a few generations back. All I have are, she was born here, at this time, and she was a housewife, and that's it.
Yeah, but you knew that. I mean, you knew that, like, growing up in your family history, you knew that about her.
Do you mean about the Dutch history, or?
I just mean, like, in terms of, like, for instance, did your mom have an interest in, like, or like anybody in your family have an interest in your past? Had they delved into it before? Did you know about her before you started researching?
No, I totally, this was all new to me when I just started researching, signed up for Ancestry.com. Like, I knew nothing about my heritage, really. We thought that Brokaw was a French name, but I really didn't know anything more than that. And I am a mix of a lot of immigrants, so it's Dutch, French, German, Irish, and I found it wasn't just Sarah that I was researching in my genealogy. I found many more amazing stories, and it really connects you to history to identify a person you knew lived back then and just imagine what they experienced,
Yeah.
It's a fascinating way to bring history to life.
Yeah, I'm so touched by the idea that when your husband proposed to you, that it really sent you down that rabbit
I know.
hole of
That was a
your
great
maiden
story.
name and your lineage.
Yeah.
What a remarkable find.
It is. And now I'm thinking I should have done Ancestry.com instead of 23andMe. I don't know. It sounds like there's a lot more information, maybe. Yeah. Yeah. I was very excited to finally do my 23.
But
You did it as well?
no, I haven't done 23andMe, but sorry, my internet is spotty.
I know. Well, you probably don't need to if, Ancestry's been so, informative.
Yeah.
You probably don't need to at all. But I was when I decided I wanted to do my DNA, I was like, do I do this one or this one? And I settled on 23andMe. But then I hear stories I've heard other stories kind of not as awesome as yours, but people mentioning that they were able to kind of trace things back. And I'm thinking, damn, I should have done Ancestry.com.
Well, I have to say, Fawn, I know a lot of people who did try to trace their lineage, and my cousin has done that in my family and has a very complicated family tree. But this is you're the first person I know who actually created a novel, a historical novel based on this, and just kind of brought this amazing Sheela to life.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. You deserve a lot of credit. Is your family just in awe of you? I mean, your whole family just think you're like a rock star now?
Maybe
they did before. I don't know.
I've heard from I found a lot of cousins that, I'm really, there's a million descendants. So I've heard from a lot of people that, I didn't know I was related to, and they are really appreciative of it. My immediate family, they're not as into it as I am. They do think it's, an accomplishment to have published a book. But yeah, my mom's been a huge supporter.
It's great.
That's great.
Yeah. Families are complicated.
She always encouraged me to write.
That's so nice.
That's awesome.
That's really cool. So what's your next book's going to be? Have you thought about it?
Yeah, there was actually, if you can tell from everything I just went through, I go down rabbit holes and side characters. So I'm working on a story that is one of the side characters that got cut. And they had a much more front row seat. They actually got taken captive by the English when the English arrived.
Whoa.
So yeah,
A man or a
I'm
woman?
telling a man. But the story is going to be about him and his wife, and they're two different points of view over the course of just, the few days before the surrender. So that's what I'm working on. But
that sounds really interesting too.
And there's more ancestors too that, outside of this Dutch era that I, just thought have such interesting stories that they need to be told.
Well, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Before we go, tell us again about your book. Tell us where it's available.
Okay, so if you want to find out more, you can visit my website. It's fawnbrokawdoyle.com. There I have blog posts with images of the court records we talked about and some of the objects of Sarah's that are in museums, plus bonus material like full bibliography, maps, and the free prequel short story. Like I said, my book is available everywhere books are sold. You can request your library to carry it and sign copies, and the immersive reading kits are on my website, and I can show you.
Show us.
It comes with a little tea package. This is a custom blend. So it ties into the story. Because Sarah's mother, lived such a long life, I kind of made up that she was really into herbalism and little apothecary tinctures and stuff. So she kind of always
has a garden. So it's not hard to believe. Yeah.
So she kind of always has a little recipe or a tea for certain points. So this is a tea for heartbreak and courage. It's hawthorn, borage, rose hips, and some edible flowers. So it's just really pretty and calming.
Nice. That's so cool. I love that.
There's a little sticker and a stroopwafel and these postcard maps.
Cool.
That have the locations in the story. So, and they make good bookmarks. So you don't have to, there are maps printed in the book, but this makes it easy. So you don't have to flip back and forth.
Very cool.
And then little colorful annotation supplies. These are little post-its and a highlighter.
That's so
That's-
cool.
That's the immersive reading kit.
I like the immersive
it.
reading kit.
Yeah,
I like
yeah,
that. We're
great.
gonna have to get one. I
We
think.
are.
Yeah,
We're
I
gonna
think
have to
we're
order
out, and then
one.
we can. Yeah, well,
And then we'll do, yeah.
take turns. That's what happens. We get a we have to take turns.
And
yes,
you can
but
follow me on Instagram at Fawn Brokaw Doyle _author.
yay.
And then I do have, since this is a podcast, I assume people are into audio, and I have an audiobook in the works.
Oh, great.
You can sign up for my email list to be notified when that's available.
Great.
Wonderful.
That's
Great.
it.
That's awesome. It's been wonderful chatting with you. Thank you for taking the time.
much. Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
interesting. So awesome to share your Sheela with us. And thank you, everybody, for listening.
Yep. Send
Please
us
send
your
your
comments
questions. Yeah.
and questions, and we will forward them on to Fawn.
Yes, we will. We will. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Unabashed in your